Good morning. It's a beautiful sunshiny morning. It's Tuesday, and instead of giving you a video in the meditation lesson series or in the Get a Body of a Tantric Sex God series, I'm going to give you an impromptu lesson. This lesson was inspired by a conversation I had with a good-hearted poster on Pinterest. And we were talking about some trends we've observed in a certain political party, and this person wrote over and over and over again over the course of several emails, this type of thinking that they're exhibiting is completely outside my realm of experience, and I just can't understand it. And I'm going to give this individual the benefit of the doubt and assume they're good-hearted and sincere. And I'm going to tell you guys a story. First of all, that phrase, I can't understand how anybody would fill in the blank. That is a common statement. If it's not said, it's paraphrased. If it's not said verbally, it's inferred. So it reveals two things. One, a need to understand why. And number two, a need not to understand why. Let's explore that second one first. I remember many decades ago, when I was in my, I must have been, 19? Maybe 19? I was enthusiastically exploring Christian fundamentalism. And I was a member of a small congregation that had just discussed how a certain member had stopped attending. And that had never occurred to me. Obviously, I was not raised in the church. I was raised Jewish. This was all foreign to me. I felt like an anthropologist in Borneo, completely out of my element. It was quite fascinating. And at that time, I was a very enthusiastic, sincere Christian fundamentalist. I had sacrificed a lot to become a Christian fundamentalist. I was actually, shunned by my family. So to me, the decision to pursue that spiritual path was a very expensive one, and one that I did not enter into lightly. And so when I heard that a fellow member of the church had just turned his back and withdrawn his membership and wasn't going to be doing that, it was completely mind-boggling. Part of me was sincerely confused, sincerely flabbergasted that anyone would make that choice. But on a deeper level, part of me was scared that I would make the same choice. And so on a deep level, part of me tried to protect myself from ever making a similar choice by abjectly refusing to stretch my imagination to consider why someone would make that choice. As we go through life, all of us, we see in literature, and we see on TV and in movies, and we see what in the world around us when people share their stories with us. Bad decisions with horrible results. And it doesn't take very long to realize that our own wisdom and our own, that's the word I'm looking for, willpower is woefully inadequate to protect us from making the same bad decisions, if not other types of bad decisions. And because we're smart enough not to want to make bad decisions, yet we're also smart enough to know that we don't know necessarily how not to make bad decisions, we sometimes hope that if we simply found the bad decisions of others to be utterly inconceivable. It would somehow prevent us from doing the same thing. Is this firmly rooted in logic? Hell no. But is this common to humans? Yes. Humans of every age, humans of every race, of every culture, of every language, have this same trait. This is one of the many traits that we can file under the heading of self-righteousness. We are all prone to self-righteousness. So rather than put our hands over our ears and go, la 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 la, let's learn from this. We all have this tendency. If we see people making greedy, heartless, foolish, destructive decisions, part of us hopes that if we could not relate to that, then we won't do that. Sadly, the opposite's true. We all are capable of every human impulse, every positive human impulse, and every negative human impulse. We all have, 9 times out of 10, we all have the same neurological equipment. We all have the same mental equipment. We all have the same ethical equipment. We're all capable of committing every glorious act and experiencing every glorious impulse and experiencing every grotesque impulse. So here's the irony. Obviously, no longer a Christian fundamentalist. As I continued my journey of evolution, eventually became a Buddhist liberal. But here's what I've found. That the further we progress on a spiritual path, a true spiritual path, when I say a true spiritual path, I mean one that takes you to its goal. There are many spiritual paths that have goals that just don't take you to. They're just dead ends. And most people are blinded to the presence of dead ends on their spiritual path because they're walking in blind faith, which is one of the reasons why I discourage blind faith. Always test the results that your path is giving you. But anyway, what I've found on the path is that as one's neurosis quiets down, as one's fear is tamed, as one's awareness grows, as one's mental and emotional flexibility grows, as one's perceptual acuity grows, one can relate and fully understand, both not just intellectually but viscerally understand everyone and everything, be it glorious or be it grotesque. There isn't a murderer you can't relate to. There isn't a rapist you can't relate to. There isn't a thief you can't relate to. There isn't a liar you can't relate to. There isn't a manipulator you can't relate to. Let's see, I'm trying to go through this index here. Deceit, manipulation, divisiveness, pretty much close to the same thing. There isn't a verbally cruel, verbally abusive person you can't relate to. There isn't a fool you can't relate to. There isn't a greedy man you can't relate to. There isn't a hate-filled man you can't relate to. There isn't an idiot you can't relate to. And if you're perceptive, if you are half the Dharma geek you think you are, I just read through the 10 non-virtuous actions described in Mahayana Dharma. If you didn't recognize it, that's okay. When you first acquire this perceptual acuity, it can be scary as hell. It can be quite unnerving. Why do I mention this? To let you know, the more we resist, when we cross our arms and scowl and say, I will never understand how anyone could do such a thing, the more we cut ourselves off from evolution. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a huge mistake to confuse understanding with compassion. Not at all. Compassion sees someone's sufferings and wishes to take those sufferings away. Compassion sees the present causes of future sufferings and wishes to take those karmic negativities away from someone. Compassion desires to rescue people from their present and future sufferings and their causes. Compassion is heroic. More often than not, self-righteous understanding seeks to seeks to justify, minimize, rationalize, and fatalize the grossly inappropriate behavior of others, thinking that the person who does this rationalization is somehow morally superior, but the fact is no. That's the antithesis, that's the opposite of compassion. If we justify someone's behavior, if we justify someone's grossly inappropriate behavior that's going to cause them great suffering and cause others sufferings, we can't take it away from them. We can't protect them from it. So just because one can understand a murderer, a rapist, a thief, a manipulator, an energy vampire, every type of fiend, doesn't mean you're going to justify, rationalize, minimize, or fatalize their horrible, horrible decisions and actions. But it means you can understand it, and hopefully, if you're really smart and really empowered, you'll be able to use that insight to communicate with them in a way that they will understand. A dead Jew, a very famous dead Jew named Paul the Apostle, wrote something that can be translated as, "I've learned how to be all things to all people." Now, he wasn't talking about being a bold-faced hypocrite. He was learning how to relate to people on their terms. Many years ago, when I was studying neurolinguistic programming, a very influential teacher in my life said, we all have our own version of English, or whatever language you speak. So if we wish to communicate to someone in a way they understand, we have to understand how they're using the language. So if you want to help a murderer, you have to be able to be so vulnerable, so raw, so courageous, that you let yourself feel their impulses. You want to help a horrible child molester or a rapist, you have to be able to be so vulnerable and so courageous that you will let yourselves resonate sympathetically with their aura and feel their dark, destructive emotions, so you can speak to them on their terms. And listen, if you've ever seen a debate where a politician is bold-faced lying, the only reason that politician is bold-faced lying is because he thinks he can get away with it. He thinks he's smarter and more clever than the people he's lying to. And obviously he's not. And the same thing when you're trying to help someone. If you're being disingenuous and if you're lying, even with the best of intentions, they will pick up on it. They might not be sophisticated, they might not have a vocabulary as cunning as yours, but viscerally they will perceive your deceit. That's why it is crucial for a bodhisattva to exercise the vulnerability and the courage to feel what someone else is feeling. As I mentioned in a prior lesson, you look at a sitar, it has 2 levels of strings, and they pluck the top string and the bottom strings vibrate sympathetically. Likewise, that can happen with an aura. I remember several years ago, I first noticed that when I would dialogue while shopping, if I was at a Spanish-speaking market, a Mexican market, in what can be described as a Mexican neighborhood, I would spontaneously start mentally thinking in what limited Spanish vocabulary I possessed. I didn't do that because I'm a liberal. I didn't do that because I'm a great polyglot. I just was vibrating in sympathetic harmony with their vibrations. So, long story short, choosing, willing not to understand someone would not prevent us from committing their same errors. Now, let's take this the next step further. Let's understand how people can commit horrible errors that hurt people in the short term and the long term. Think of the brain, if you will. Now, evolution is just a theory, but let's play with it. Let's play with it for a moment. There are those who say that the reptilian brain first evolved, and then the mammalian brain evolved, and then the primate frontal lobes evolved. And it could be said that the reptilian brain is the source of just our instinctual drives, the 5 F's. Whenever the reptilian brain, the brain stem, encounters anything being a phenomena, it asks 5 questions. Hey, do I fuck it? Do I feed on it? That means eat it. Do I fight it? Do I flee from it? Or do I faint before it? That's right, folks, the brain stem is not a very sophisticated fellow. So when you look at bugs, or you look at lizards, or you look at fish, or you look at birds, you see that they've got these things built into them. We have those same things too. We all have the greed drive to acquire. We all have the hate drive to push away, to shove away. We all have the fear drive to run, screaming in the opposite direction. We have the lust drive, which is pretty much the greed drive, to procreate and to propitiate the species, especially our gene pool. Now, we also have a midbrain. And that's basically this area right here. So basically, your brainstem is right around here, top of your neck, right in here. Your midbrain is up in here, a little bit higher, a little bit lower than your scalp, obviously. I'm not going to open my head for the sake of the video. I hope you understand. And that could be said to be the seat of our idealistic notions, or sentimentality, or romance, or selflessness. And in the front of our head, right around here, is the prefrontal cortex. That's the seat of logic. Now here's the irony. Freud, who started off as a physician, who actually was a physician and the pioneer of psychiatry, said that human experience can be described in terms of id, which is just selfish drives, superego, which is our idealistic self, and what mediates between the two is our ego, our mediator. Which is why I really take exception to pseudo-mystics who try to say ego's bad, because clearly they're not understanding the word ego. Freud gets to define ego because he coined the phrase. So the reason American pseudo-mystics use the word ego is because when Hinduism and Zen texts were first taught in America and in the West, various authors tried to legitimize it by using scientific terms they didn't understand. And it's gotten people in a lot of problems. But right now, let's stay on track. So what happens is, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, we have 3 brains. A reptile brain, our mammal brain, and our primate brain. We have our selfish drives, our idealism, and our logical brain. And we need all 3. If you try to knock out 2 or knock out 1, just rely on if you try to just rely on one part of your brain, it's not going to work. We're not designed to thrive that way. What happens is sometimes selfish people will have indulge selfish impulses and then use their prefrontal cortex, their logical mind, to dream up sentimental reasons to justify them, or logical reasons to justify them. But the truth be told, often decisions that we don't understand or don't agree with come from the unchecked reptilian brain. And that's a nice thing. We have a brain that's complex enough to have checks and balances. What happens so many times, tragically, is those checks and balances can fail. When you look at a serial killer, a murderer, a rapist, a molester, there's a disconnect between different parts of his brains. A disorganized serial killer or serial rapist or serial molester will just be living in his brainstem. An organized serial killer or serial molester will be using both his brainstem and his prefrontal cortex. But you and I and the rest of the normal focus, we also have our midbrain, our sentimental brain, our idealism, which throws ethics into the mix. So, whether we like it or not, we can all admit on some level we all share the same impulses, both light impulses and dark impulses. But what makes us healthy is the ability to recognize whether some impulses are beneficial or harmful in the moment or in the circumstance. Obviously, if you want to the impulse to murder someone for you who's taking too long at the ATM is not a useful impulse. However, if you're a soldier at war and the impulse to defend your comrades against the enemy forces, that can be a useful impulse. So sometimes the same violent impulses are appropriate in different circumstances. Luckily, we have a midbrain and a forebrain to help us sort that out. Now, people, let's get back to the original question. Someone wrote me on Pinterest expressing complete amazement, astonishment that certain politicians can make certain decisions. There's a wonderful phrase I was exposed to in the English show Sherlock. It's a contemporized retelling of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Tales of Sherlock Holmes. And in the first episode of the first season, and I'm going to paraphrase this brutally, Inspector Lestrade said, "Oh yes, God help us, Sherlock Holmes is a great man. Perhaps someday he'll be a good man." And that one-liner is profound. Explore this with me, if you will. We often look at a great man as someone who is the alpha, someone who gets things done, whether they're scientific or artistic or political. They really get things done. They're movers and they're shakers. And if you look at the alphas, they can be bastards. They can act without ethics, without honor. They're just driven by their goals. That's what we often call a great man. And we often see that with politicians. They're able to get things done and speak eloquently and negotiate peace treaties, but they can't keep their Johnson in the pants. They can't, treat their family right. They snap at their underlings. Typical alpha behavior. So that's what we call a great man. Well, a good man is the opposite. A good man, is ethical and does try to be balanced, and is considerate of his co-workers and is considerate of his family members and of his friends and of his partner. and is not dead. He can see temptations to be a bastard, but he chooses to ignore those temptations, or repress those temptations, or deal with those temptations, and still chooses to do the right thing. That's what we call a good man. Seldom they're the same person or the same moment. You know, I'll be honest with you. I love President Clinton. He's one of my favorite presidents. I would trust him to run the nation. I would not trust him to, if I had a tantric sweetheart, I would not trust him to give her a ride home. Now, I feel the opposite about George W. Bush. If George W. Bush was sober, I would trust him to drive her home. I would not trust him in the Oval Office again. Obviously, there's some moot points in this country. No one's allowed a third term. But that's a reference to the great riddle. What's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? The answer is Republican wants to fuck your country, a Democrat wants to fuck your wife. That's not always true. That's just a joke. I think it's cute and funny. But the thing is, it does go back to, it does show areas of goodness and areas of greatness. The leader who can't keep his Johnson in his pants. A leader who will lie while looking you straight in the eye is common. It is common. It's a disconnect. Does that mean that all great men are serial killers? No. But they could be. They are driven more by their brainstem than their midbrain, driven more by their brainstem than their forebrain. Now, some people are just absolutely worthless. They're nice guys, but everyone walks all over them. Their wife, their spouse, their children, their co-workers, they get nothing done, but they're harmless. That's someone whose life is just completely governed by their midbrain. So we need balance. And let's take it to another step. How do people in power do things that are short-sighted and destructive for themselves and others in the long term? Because they are blinded by desire. Whether it's desire for wealth, or it's the desire for the illusion of power. Because let's face it, people with the real power are the people behind the thrones, not the people on the thrones. But the illusion of power. And or they want prestige, and they want those things more than they want the propitiation of the planet, the propitiation of the species, or the evolution of the species. For them, that they are blinded by that desire. One of my teachers, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, one of the late teachers of the 14th Dalai Lama, said that hate and anger can blind us to our own self-preservation and put us in a state where we will gladly die if it means we get to kill our enemy. So desire to kill or desire to acquire can blind us to all logic and all consequences. That's one of the reasons why people who are not scientists will sometimes ignore scientists if the scientists' findings are contrary to what they desire. I'm reminded of Upton Sinclair, the man who wrote The Jungle. I'm going to horribly paraphrase him. He said, "It's very difficult to get a man to understand something if his paycheck depends on him not understanding something." So if someone makes an inconceivable amount of money, or wants to make an inconceivable amount of money, it's very difficult for them and let's say they want to make that from the petroleum industry, then it's very difficult for them to understand the drawbacks of using petroleum, and it's very difficult to get them to understand the viability of other cheaper renewable, healthy, healing alternatives. Because it's not a logical issue. It's a brainstem issue. It's a greed issue. Same thing with racism. If you deal with, someone who just has a bloodlust for a member of a race, any race will do. Let's use it specifically. Let's say it's a member of the KKK just absolutely hating black people. No amount of logic will change it, because his drive does not come from logic. It comes from the brainstem. If someone is determined to murder and hate and destroy others, you cannot look for logic. And this is a big thing. This is a very big thing. In sales, many decades ago I studied sales. And one of my teachers said, people make emotional decisions and then mask them with a logical sounding justifications. If someone has done that, no amount of logic will change their mind. You have to deal with them emotionally. If we wish to influence the world spiritually, emotionally, politically, financially, we have to speak to people in the language they understand. Someone is driven by financial greed. You can't speak to them about ethics. You can't speak to them about ecology. And you can't speak to them about human rights. Unless you express ecological, humanitarian concerns in financial terms. Then they'll make sense. What? You mean the ecological path can be more profitable? Well, then tell me more. Oh, switching over, retooling could be more profitable? Tell me more. Oh, respecting human rights could be more profitable? Tell me more. If someone lusts for prestige, if someone lusts for power, then you have to address your concerns from that perspective. If we refuse to understand the nitty-gritty behind someone's choices, we won't be able to help them. Oh, sure, we might self-righteous to say, I could never understand how they could do such a thing. But that won't help us help them, and won't help us help their victims, prevent their victims from becoming victims. If we want to become great men and women, we become Mahatmas. If we want to become great bodhisattvas, we want to become great saints. If we want to become spiritual superheroes, we have to put aside our fear and our comfort and our convenience. Allow ourselves to resonate with the villains we're exposed to. Viscerally understand what they want and what they're going through, so we can communicate them effectively on their level. When I was in junior high, yes, this crust of the earth was still cooling. During the Reagan administration, a fellow named James Watts, I think he was Secretary of the Interior, and he was just a madman. He was just selling off national parks and just destroying resources, and acted like he didn't care about the environment. When confronted by reporters, he said, "You're right, I don't. Oh, I believe Christ is going to come back in this generation. What are we saving the earth for? It's going to burn." And of course, that was a paraphrase. Now, I'm not saying All Christians are like that. Just James Watts, bless his little heart. So, people's beliefs can have a huge effect on what they do. But was he really acting from belief, or was he using a sentimental, religious justification to mask a greed impulse? That happens frequently. People will often say things that they think their listeners want to hear to justify their selfish drives, to justify their hate or their greed or their fear. So the next time you're reading the newspaper or watching the news, and you see a villain do something villainous, or you see a politician or a political coalition do things that you think are just horrific, look beyond the talk. Look beyond the veil of pseudo-logic. Look beyond the veil of pseudo-sentimentality. Look at the core instinctual drives in play. So here is the thing. I used to have a rabbi who would say, when you look at a garden, take off your glasses. Enjoy the disfocus. Enjoy the flowers. Don't put your glasses on. Don't look too closely. You'll see dirt and bugs. Well, if we want to evolve, if we want the world around us to evolve, we have to use the courage to put our glasses on, metaphorically speaking, and see the dirt and see the bugs. Any organic farmer will tell you, no dirt, no bugs, no worms, no flowers, no fruit, no vegetables. And awareness of the nitty-gritty is required to influence the good stuff. And so I invite everyone watching this video to exercise the courage to be vulnerable to the nitty-gritty, both in ourselves and in other people, so we too can get to the good stuff. I thank you for your time and your kind attention. May you and yours be healthy and happy. I want to remind you to find that like button in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Give that a click as the thumbs up symbol. That'll reveal 3 social networking buttons. Once you click all 3 of those, share this video with others. So whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you are a progressive or a conservative, whether you're a male or a female, everyone uses logic and uses sentimentality and uses instinct. See how those 3 work to see what's really going on. Help others to cut through the obscuring fluff and get to the reality. Below this video there should be 2 links. If not, then just go to the this corner and click the YouTube icon a couple times, and you'll find 2 links. You might have to. The first link will take you to the registration page, so you can reserve your seat at the next webinar. The next webinar begins Friday, the 2nd of November. I'll see you there.